Ancient Egypt has always been fascinating for my wife and I. In the distant years of our youth in the redneck backwoods of hyper-religious Michigan, the mythos of ancient Egypt could be studied without the social cost of instantly being associated with a cult or worse socialist themes. Such were the 80s. Regardless, it is only recently, with the advent of less biased historical facts being available to almost anyone who looked them up, that it is clear how limited what was available to us was. I knew the name Nefertiti multiple decades before I had even heard of the name Akhenaten. I had no idea who she was, and pop media often portrayed her as something of a Cleopatra figure, a ruling queen, which she very well could have been. The record isn't entirely clear, but not in the way pop culture portrayed. And 15-year-old me didn't have the internet. I had started watching cartoons in a library with books written before I was born. So that leads me here to truly studying and hopefully understanding some of what happened during one of the founding civilizations of mankind, and the truly fascinating story of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, father of Tutankhamun and destroyer of the status quo. Probably. Part of me wants to like his story. The atheist tradition breaker, the individual who raised to believe, who found freedom in casting aside the authority of the priesthood, sees a kindred spirit in a man, and that divested political power from a domineering priesthood. But, but the skeptic in me, the man with a wife excommunicated from the Mormon church at 13 because she looked up Joseph Smith's criminal record, he looks at Akhenaten with a different view. He looks at burial grounds around Amarna, where the average age was 30, and the skeletons showed significant signs that hard labor played a part in their deaths. He looks at the political power of a state-enforced monotheism with only one priest, who's the ruler, has, and wonders, what's the difference between Akhenaten and Joseph Smith, or Jim Jones, maybe David Koresh, or possibly a certain political leader who taps into a voting bloc whose doctrine says they are the persecuted ones. And that's where I land. Humanity is a social species, and as much as group consensus and bottom-to-top input is what makes a truly great team, an all-caps leader makes the process easier and less involved, well, in the short term anyway. It's impossible to tell if Akhenaten actually believed in his religion or was using it as a political tool. And as much as atheist skeptical me looks at disrupting the clerical powers that be as a good thing, the part of me that watched politics and religion mixing to become a toxic gas looks at a state religion with only one connection to one God and realizes how much power that system gives to that singular priest. Spoiler alert, a lot. From what can be told from the historical record, most of the Egyptians and kingdom didn't follow Akhenaten to a barren strip of nowhere to fast build his idealized city, and that's probably for the best, as it was abandoned almost immediately after his 17-year rule ended. Akhenaten's memory was overwritten. His city, which he apparently worked people to death to build, was abandoned. Then Aten, the sun god, was reabsorbed into a pantheon of polytheism. In the end, we know more about what happened during his reign because of letters and records from the people actually making the government run than from his own records, which is in retrospect an obvious conclusion because that's how reality tends to work. The claims of state religions are often entirely divested from the bureaucracy required to actually run the state. So what do we take away from the heretic pharaoh? Personally, I look at his story and think, this is why we need to understand history. We need to remember these examples, and we need to avoid them.